Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this week's episode. This week's episode is a little different because in this video, I'm being interviewed. I was recently asked to appear on Angelica Diaz's Instagram channel so that she could ask me some questions about cyber-sex trafficking. And I thought, since I'm also planning on releasing a video about online sex trafficking and Pornhub next week, this would be a great video to share here on the Human Trafficking Hater channel as well. If you have time, please check out Angelica's Instagram channel. She has just completed a Dress Ember campaign where she was able to raise more than $750 for anti-human trafficking nonprofits through the month of December. She is an amazing advocate against human trafficking and is doing all this while pursuing her undergraduate degree. If nothing else, send her some love here in the comment section and let her know she's doing an amazing job. Now, on with the episode.
Okay. Hello, Instagram. We are here today with Professor David Deeds. Professor David Deeds teaches at the College of DuPage and Governor State University, and he is also the interim executive director of Radical Empathy Education Foundation. We're here to talk about human trafficking. So my first question for you is, what is cybersex trafficking?
Okay, so cybersex trafficking is basically sex trafficking perpetuated through a digital forum. It's not conducted by the exact same people that would have sex trafficking, but what it certainly does do is it opens up the possibilities of who can be trafficked and who is able to traffic at the same time. So human trafficking, there's already 40 million people, or an estimated 40 million people being trafficked by tens of thousands of people around the world. So what cybersex trafficking looks like is it can be individuals being forced, coerced, or frauded into doing things in front of their webcam for the pleasure of somebody else, and while somebody else is making a profit off of that, because that's the commercialization is what makes something trafficking. So somebody's making something off of that taking place. So it can be little kids that are being forced into doing this. It can be teenagers that are being forced into doing this, and it can be that the trafficker is there with them, or somebody can be committing those acts to them, or they might have to perform the acts on themselves or to another child. So it's definitely within if you think about the AMP model for what human trafficking is, the definition, there's the actions, means, and then what it's producing. So it falls within that category for sure, where you see that there's these kids, in most cases, going to be under 18 that are being forced to commit these acts. Like I said, they can either be doing it to themselves or doing it to other individuals. And it exists, in anywhere that you can have, like the internet is where it can exist.
And where do these acts take place?
So, like I said, it definitely takes place online, but it takes place in all the way that it comes about takes place. So if you think about video games and you think about little apps where people are just kind of like meeting up or just trying to connect with each other, that's where it can be taking place. So for example, Fortnite and Roblox, like they're just video games, but they're places where you're socializing, connecting with people. That's where that kind of like a grooming process can begin, and it brings people to that next level where they can end up finding somebody and then doing like a video chat or something like that, or a Zoom or whatever. And then the next thing that you know, between that grooming, you find yourself being a sex trafficking victim. You've done one act and they kind of got you pinned down, and now you're trying to do another act so they don't share what it is that you did before. And that falls within the realm of like sextortion, where you are using images or videos to extort somebody into doing something that they wouldn't otherwise be doing. So through the apps, through the games, pretty much any online forum, is where it can take place. So obviously people think maybe they're going to the dark web or something like that. But I mean, even through Facebook or something like that is where you can connect with and kind of like find these different groups of different individuals.
And you use the word grooming. So for people who don't know what grooming is, could you elaborate more what it looks like, what it is?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll try to keep it brief. So for grooming, because it doesn't look like the same thing for everybody. So grooming can be, it's really the progressive bringing along of somebody to make them more accepting of doing sexual acts that they wouldn't be willing to do beforehand. And it normalizes that behavior for them. So if I'm a 7-year-old kid, I've never heard of sex before, but when this individual meets me, they start talking to my hands a lot, but I notice it's off camera. So But when they first meet that person, they might not say anything that's sexual. They just have conversation, establish a relationship with that person. Now there's some trust that's there, right? And so like whether that's on a video game or through a socializing app, you've established some level of trust. And then, days, couple of weeks later, then you mention some sexual terminology. You don't mention that they're doing anything. You just mention some terminology. So that could be things, oral or sexual gratification, and then from there you trump it up and you go to the next level. So you just keep on progressively normalizing it, and maybe you share a couple of videos, and then you start making more suggestions, and it really normalizes the process of intercourse for youth, and then by the time that it's at the moment of being trafficked, they've already been kind of brought along this whole time, and they don't even realize that next step. And they might be scared for that next step, but they've already kind of like moved the line in the sand, so to speak, so many times that for them it's just making that one more jump, and it's for this individual that you've established trust with, and kind of like you've already done all these other things, so why not do this last thing? And you want to make them happy. Or it could be that the force comes in then at the very end, but the coercion has been working the whole time to kind of bring them along. So that's what grooming is. And again, it doesn't look the same for everybody, but it's definitely the thing that you'll see all the time is the progression that's taking place.
And then the final question, do you know of any 2 cases that you could share with us?
Yes. So an example of a cyber sex trafficking case. So 2 of them, there's the one from the Philippines. There was a boy who was 7 and his sister was 2, and his mom was forcing him to go on webcam with his sister, and they would have to perform, I believe, sexual acts on each other, but certainly on themselves. And then there was an individual who was also in the Philippines who would be the trafficker, so to speak, who was making the money, but he was selling this footage to people, from the UK, from the US, from all these Western countries, and from non-Western countries as well. They would pay, $50 to $100, and then they would get to say what acts they wanted the kids to do, right? So they're exchanging the money. So there's that commercialization that's taking place. The trafficker's getting the money, but also mom's involved, and so she's a trafficker as well. And so, and that's why I would say into that first question, that's why this really opens it all up, because that mom likely was not going to go out on the streets and force her kids into street prostitution. But she might think it's acceptable to have them perform some sex acts in what she considers the safety of her home. That's how she neutralizes and justifies what she's doing. And so she's making some extra money because there's not enough jobs. And so that's how it kind of like opened up to everybody else. But they just continue with that example. Those kids were rescued actually by IJM, International Justice Mission, worked with like local authorities to rescue those kids. So that's one example, and that's like the international version. And then for a domestic one here in the States, there was a 17-year-old kid who was playing Fortnite, and he exhibited some vulnerabilities, like risk factors. And the traffickers picked up on that because they play the game to establish relationships with people that are vulnerable. And they know how to pick up on if somebody sounds depressed, or if they're lonely, or if they don't talk to anybody else in the group. And so that's what they're on there for. And so they've become kind of like matches at picking up on that. So an example I give to people, and they're like, well, how do they know how to do that? For myself, I used to be a server at a restaurant for years. So when you're a server, you pick up on little cues from people, right? Like the little euphemisms or whatever it is that says that they want to hear you tell a story. They don't want to hear a story. They just want their food right away, or whatever it is, you kind of pick up on these like little cues. They don't have to speak anything. You just get it. So that's the same thing for the traffickers, is they've gotten really good at going into these games and picking up on little signs. So in any case, this 17-year-old kid exhibited these signs. Trafficker connected with him. They got to talking about how tough life was for this kid in Louisiana. The trafficker offered to let him stay with him in Florida. This is after they progressively went along and established that relationship. And so this kid believed, at 17, I don't think a lot of people are thinking, oh, my 17-year-old son is at risk of being sex trafficked. But that's what happened. He met up with the trafficker in Louisiana. The trafficker drove him to Florida like he said he would, but only to lock him into a trailer and allow other men to abuse him, and he abused him as well, along with another 16-year-old boy. So when you talk about what is cyber sex trafficking, it definitely exists throughout the internet, and it definitely can go into all these like little pockets in video games and into different apps. And I think Omegle is a great one, because it's an app about meeting different strangers, And for sure, there's been traffickers that have been caught on Omegle connecting with people and then kind of like trafficking them out of CyberSex and into, physical sex trafficking where they're actually meeting up with the kids. So CyberSex can definitely start off as being online and then make its way into, if you want to say more physical or traditional sex trafficking. But even just the CyberSex itself is obviously horrendous when you think about a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old and their mother's forcing them to perform these like different sex acts, regardless if they're not on the streets. That's still a pretty horrific thing. So both of those examples though show that it can go anywhere from being like a 2-year-old girl that's being trafficked and basically by her mom to a 17-year-old boy who's just playing a video game and thinks, and a friendship that had started up was really authentic, but online people can be as nefarious as they want to be. And, you can have real world implications. So in both cases, all those kids were rescued. They ended up getting out of those situations. But if people can just be a little bit more aware about some of the signs of sex trafficking or just being cautious in general, can kind of keep some of that from taking place, and then they don't even have to go through the hardship. So.
Okay, and I just realized I said you were the interim executive director of Reef, but I didn't explain who Reef is. Do you want to say a few words about Reef?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Reef is Radical Empathy Education Foundation, and it's a nonprofit that I'm the interim executive director, also the curriculum director. And so what we're doing is we are a one-stop shop for human trafficking education. So if you want to know more about human trafficking, you can connect with us. And the great thing is that we have something called vulnerability identification software. And so what that is software that is on a headset. It's a virtual reality, and it's also online, so it's web-based, and it allows you to take on the role of a human trafficking victim, so you can better understand what coercion and fraud look like, as opposed to just having endless amounts of literature thrown at you. We also have endless amounts of literature as well. So if you wanted to go to reefcares.org, you'll get all the information that you could possibly want. And so you can find my email on there and contact me directly, and I'll be happy to share with you whatever it is that you want to know about it. But so Radical Empathy is definitely looking to be a one-stop shop for human trafficking education for anybody.
All right, well, thank you so much, Professor Deeds. If you want to learn more about human trafficking, Professor Deeds also has a YouTube channel titled Human Trafficking Hater, and all of his videos are most of your videos are under 10 minutes, and they're basically crash courses on different topics within human trafficking, so highly recommend. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today, so thank you very much, Professor, and I'll end the recording now.
That is all for this week's episode. If you want to see more content about human trafficking, be sure to click the subscribe button because there are new episodes every week and you don't want to miss them. Thanks for watching.